Chapter 5. The Journey Begins. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. Revelation 13:10. The mood of the small group of family and friends gathered on Aunt Wealthy's vine-covered front porch on the last day of May was an odd mixture of excitement and tears. Millie was sure she knew exactly how the children of Israel had felt when they faced the Red Sea. She swallowed hard and tried to smile at her friends. "The girls do look sweet, Millie," said Bee as she adjusted the bow on Zilla's bonnet. Millie had to agree. Ada and Zilla were neat and clean in their new travel outfits. Millie had sewn Ada's herself, and Bee and Annabeth had finished Zilla's. "Do you suppose there will be shops in Pleasant Plains? I expect the fashions will be a bit backwards." "Who cares about the fashions?" Camilla said. "What are you going to do about your studies? And are you taking books to read on the way?" "I expect there will be shops," Millie said. "And I have packed my own books to read, though who knows how much time I will have, as I am minding the children." Millie bit her lip. Even if there were no shops, no parties, and not the slightest hint of fashion, she knew she could get by. But her friends, what would she do without them? Without Bee to help with the dresses, without Annabeth to understand her heart before she even spoke, without Camilla to read sonnets? "I wish I were taking you all with me," Millie said. Annabeth took her hand and squeezed it. "Is the stage late, Papa?" Rupert asked. "Just a little. Dawn, get down off that trellis." "But Papa, I want to be the first one to see it." "I think we can arrange that without pulling down Auntie's vines." He swung Dawn up onto his shoulders. "Let's take a little walk down the street." He strode off with Zilla and Ada on each side, and Cyril and Fan dancing along behind. "You have nappies for the baby?" Aunt Wealthy asked for the third time. "Yes, Auntie dear, I have everything we will need." "I can't believe you are really going," Annabeth said to Millie. "Remember, you promised to write us every week." "And send the letters to you by turns," Millie nodded, "so that you can read them together. The first will go to Camilla." Camilla just nodded. There were tears in her sweet blue eyes, and Millie knew she was fighting to keep them from falling. "It's coming!" Rue was the first one to run back up the street. "The coach is coming!" Millie turned to look one last time at the beautiful brick home she was leaving. That window with the morning glory vine was Mama's room, and that's where Millie had been born. The nursery, the kitchen that was filled with gingerbread smells at Christmas, the dining room where Papa always led the prayers. Millie felt an arm slip around her waist. "It was a beautiful home," her mother whispered. "God blessed me with 8 children there, and the same God that blessed me there will be with us wherever He leads us." Millie and her mother turned back together, just as 4 prancing steeds swept around the corner, and swaying and rolling, the coach dashed up to the gate. The driver drew in rein, and the guard sprang from his lofty perch, threw open the door, and let down the steps. Wanago stood on his hind legs and spun in place, afraid he would be left behind. But Aunt Wealthy opened her carpet bag, and he jumped in. She zipped it almost shut, with just his nose peeking out. There were hurried embraces and farewells, a hasty stowing away of bags, bundles, and passengers, large and small, in the inside, and of more bulky baggage in the boot. The inside of the coach was so crowded with Keiths that Stuart gave Rue permission to ride on the seat with the driver. Aunt Wealthy handed in Wanago's bag, and then exclaimed, "Wait! Oh, wait!" and rushed past the well-wishers and the young pastor and his wife into her home. She returned with an embroidered pillow from the settee in her library. "I never travel without this," she said, hugging the pillow close. "Mother filled it with her own feathers." "Was great-grandmother a bird?" Fan asked, looking puzzled. "No," Ada said. "The feathers came from her geese, silly." The steps were replaced. The coach door slammed. The guard's horn tooted a warning to traffic on the street. The coachman's whip cracked, and they were off. Millie watched through the back window until they had turned the corner, and she couldn't see her friends any more. Jesus, she prayed silently, it's more than I can bear. Will I ever see them again? The familiar town scenes outside the coach window slowly changed to countryside, then long, low hills. When Millie could no longer recognize the hills and trees of Lansdale, she laid her head on her arms and tried not to weep. The few hours' drive it took for the travelers to reach the town where they were to exchange the stage for a canal boat were quite enough to convince Millie that she did not enjoy adventures. The coach was stuffy and became stuffier as the day grew warm. The rocking stage soon lulled baby Annis to sleep, but the other children had a hard time keeping still. Wanago wiggled and squirmed until Aunt Wealthy was forced to let him out. He settled himself on Don's lap and gazed out the window. Marcia produced a catalogue and, after reading several stories aloud, used scissors from her basket to clip out figures that Ada and Zillah and Fan made into paper dolls. When the coachman finally opened the door, the young Keiths practically exploded down the step, Cyril and Don tumbling over one another. "Is this Pleasant Plains?" Fan asked, looking wide-eyed at the new town. "No," Stuart laughed. "This is where we get aboard the canal boat. But I think we should stretch our legs and have some dinner first." Stuart let the young ones run until they had used up some of their energy, then sat the family down to a good meal at a hotel nearby. After they had dined, they boarded the packet Pauline, which was docked at the wharf. Millie was fascinated by the little boat. It was really nothing more than a floating box, one cabin that housed all of the passengers below, and the deck, which was simply the roof of the cabin. The passengers seated themselves on cushioned benches that ran around the inside of the cabin, while the hands stowed baggage on the deck. The quarters were only a little less confined than those of the stage. The Pauline's interior was so narrow that when the table was to be set for a meal, most of the passengers had to go on deck to be out of the way. When all of the passengers and luggage were aboard, a 2-mule team was hitched to the front of the packet. With a shout from the mule driver, the mules started plodding along the towpath. The ropes grew taut, and the packet started to move slowly up the canal. The mules were changed every 15 or 20 miles, day or night, and a fresh driver and team pulled the packet on. New passengers arrived at almost every dock, and old ones departed, so there was a constant panorama of humanity. When the Pauline came to a lock, some of the passengers would get off and walk along the towpath, catching the boat again past the lock. The young Keiths took several such walks with Aunt Wealthy and Wanago as the afternoon wore on. Finally, the captain announced that it was time to prepare for supper. The passengers climbed the short steps up to the deck. The Ohio countryside, hills green with early summer, dragged by at a slow mule's pace. The passengers found seats on their chests and crates, and children ran amongst them playing tag and making new friends. Millie sat between Aunt Wealthy and a very large, nervous young woman who introduced herself as Ann Leah. "I do hope there are no bridges," Ann Leah said, her fingers fluttering to her throat. "I shouldn't want to spoil my dress lying on the deck." Papa had explained that when they came to a bridge, anyone on deck would have to get down on their hands and knees or be swept off the deck into the murky waters of the canal. "Now, dear, I'm sure the captain would not have sent us all up here if there were any bridges looming," Aunt Wealthy said, scratching Wanago's ears. Ann Leah still craned her neck, watching the front of the boat fearfully until they were summoned below. Supper was a simple meal of cold meat and bread. Afterwards, the passengers were sent aloft again, as the cabin was prepared for the night. The bench they had been sitting on all day was used as a lower bunk, and other shelves hung above it. Blankets were produced, and the passengers settled into their narrow, uncomfortable berths. Millie helped her mother put the children to bed, all in a group along one wall. Rupert and Fan had the uppermost berth, though Rue had to be careful not to bump his head when he sat up. Ada and Zillah were below him, and then Cyril and Don, left together only when they promised not to talk and go right to sleep. Stuart said prayers with each of the children, listened as they whispered their Bible verses in his ear, then went up on deck, leaving Aunt Wealthy, Marcia, and Millie to tuck them in. "The blankets are all damp," Zillah said. "I don't like it." "That's because we're on the water," Marcia said, "but they will keep you perfectly warm." The passengers around them settled into place with complaints and groans. Some were soon fast asleep, while others talked quietly. "Tell me a story, Millie," Ada said. "Not tonight," Millie said. "It would disturb the others." She rubbed the little girl's back, feeling her muscles relax and asleep. Suddenly, a rumbling growl filled the cabin. Ada jerked upright. The rumble came again, more terrible than before. "I heard a bear, Mama," she said. "I'm afraid." "No, dearest, that is just a gentleman snoring." The snorer grunted suddenly, as if he had received an elbow in the ribs. His growl subsided into gargles and whistles, and Ada lay back down. "I don't like sleeping with all these people," Zillah said. "I want my own bed. I want my own room." "Shh," Marcia said. "My children must be considerate of others." Babies cried, older children fretted, some grown people indulged in loud complaints. Aunt Leah was much too large to fit on the narrow bench beds, and so had to spend the night sitting up. Altogether, the cabin was a scene of confusion, and the young Keiths felt very forlorn. But mother, aunt, and older sister were very patient. They soothed, comforted, and at length succeeded in getting them all to sleep. Aunt Leah, saying that she couldn't possibly sleep, and probably wouldn't sleep all night, offered to watch over the children if Wealthy, Millie, and Marcia wanted to go up on deck for an hour to enjoy the moonlight. Grateful for the offer, the three climbed up the short flight of steps that led from the stern to the deck. Stuart found them seats on some of their own trunks. There were a number of other passengers sitting about or pacing to and fro. Among the former was a portly gentleman who sat on a crate at the stern end of the boat, his elbow on his knee and his bearded chin in his hand, gazing idly over the moonlit landscape. After a pleasant half-hour, Stuart and Marcia excused themselves, saying that they would watch over the children, leaving Millie, Wanago, and Wealthy on the deck. The Pauline glided onward with easy, pleasant motion. All had grown quiet in the cabin below, and the song of the bullfrogs, the dull thud of the mules' hoofs, and the gentle lap of the water against the sides of the boat were the only sounds that broke the stillness. "So, how do you like travel?" Aunt Wealthy asked. "Is it as exciting as you expected?" "I don't like it at all so far," Millie confessed. "It is cramped and uncomfortable, and I don't know how the children are going to stand days of this. I thought it would be more, exciting." "But it is exciting!" exclaimed Aunt Wealthy. "The breeze is so refreshing, the moonlight so beautiful." "Yes, the moonlight is enchanting," said Millie, "and one gets a good view of it here." "Low bridge!" sang out the steersman suddenly. "Low bridge! Everybody down!" The cry was repeated in louder, more emphatic tones. Millie dropped to her hands and knees beside Aunt Wealthy and looked towards the helmsman. The boat was already sweeping under the bridge. She glanced around. The passengers were all hugging the deck, ladies in fine dresses and dock workers alike. All but one. The gentleman, seated on the back of the ship, was a lone silhouette against the sky. "Get down!" someone called, but the thinker didn't move. "Get down, I say!" Suddenly there was a rustling of skirts beside her as Aunt Wealthy stood up, and then Wealthy was racing down the deck, just ahead of the advancing bridge, Wanago at her heels. Millie saw her leap over a small chest, petticoats flying. Then the shadow of the bridge swallowed them, and Millie saw no more.